Hello students, today's topic is going to be ways to improve effective communication. So we will look at in depth about the different approaches that we can take in enhancing the communication. Each form is unique in its own sense and each form has its own benefits and challenges. Therefore, we can discuss how best we can decipher and attune to the requirements of each form of communication. The various forms of communication will be covered in depth in a different lesson. However, in this section, we will address how we can enhance our communication with respect to different forms. The main objectives in this lesson are to understand 7 C's of communication. The first one is clarity or clear, concise, correct, concrete, complete, courteous. The next C is coherent. The 3 major forms of communication we will focus on: verbal, non-verbal and written communication. Communication can be explained as the process of exchanging information, ideas and thoughts between 2 or more people. According to McFarland, communication is a process of meaningful interaction among human beings. More specifically, it is the process by which meanings are perceived and understandings are reached among human beings. Overcoming barriers to communication is helpful in reducing the gap of uncertainties in the process of communication. The purpose of overcoming barriers to communication enables successful transmission of message from the sender to the receiver. For this process to happen effectively, it takes conscious effort and time from both the sender and receiver in approaching the process of communication. 7 C's of communication are given by Cutlip and Center in 1952, particularly are helpful in dealing with semantic, linguistic and message related barriers to communication. And these 7 C's of communication are: the first one is clarity or clear. The message which is to be communicated should be drafted or spoken in a clear and comprehensible language addressing the needs of the receiver. Use of simple language, context, structure and sequence play a vital role in improving the clarity of the message. Minimizing external barriers and using the appropriate channels of communication is also significant in maintaining clarity in the process of communication. By adhering to the clarity in communication, we can minimize the chances of misinterpretation and be successful at transmitting the message efficiently. The next C is concise. Communication should be brief and to the point to effectively get to the receiver. Lengthy and complex messages seldom fulfill the purpose of communication. Concise messages are preferred by everybody as it takes less cognitive effort to interpret the message and the meaning can be deciphered accurately in less time. It is important to draft the message in a concise way that its essence is communicated accurately without being compromised. In other words, the important elements of the messages should not be ignored to keep it short and to the point. We can achieve this by scanning the message thoroughly, jotting the important points, making several drafts and practices to send to the receiver, and finally post the message or share the message with the receiver. The next C is correct. It is always a prudent practice to convey information that is checked and verified for its accuracy. Incorrect, indirect and incomplete messages often lead to misunderstanding and conflicts. It is always important to convey information that is backed up by research, and if it is a matter of personal opinion, it can be specified clearly to avoid any sort of confusion. In organizations, information based on rumors should not be shared with others as it creates a negative impression about the person sharing the information. There might be times when people want to send correct information, however, they might commit errors in the process of sending across the messages. Therefore, proofreading or revising before communicating proves successful in transmitting the message accurately. There are several grammar check softwares that can be used to proofread written content for accuracy, and it is always advisable to use technology to check huge amounts of data for its accuracy. The next C is concrete. Information that is backed up by evidence and which is specific in nature is considered as a concrete message. Vague and unclear messages that do not give a big picture and that are not backed up by facts and research should be avoided. Concrete messages attract the attention of the receiver and engages the person with the message. By using concrete communication, the message develops a focus and specificity which makes it effective for the receivers to understand it appropriately. The next C is complete. Communication can become effective only after it is shared with caution and in a complete manner. Complete information gives answers to all the questions of the receivers and helps in better decision making by the receiver. Sender of the message should be careful to incorporate all the elements of the message to the receiver and check the message for completeness before sending in the message. Complete sharing of messages aid in enhancing the relationship between people as it clears air for inconsistencies. Complete messages also enable the receiver to plunge into action without any hesitancy. Checking for the message to be complete is essential, especially in a one-sided communication such as advertisements, etc. The next C is courteous. A courteous communication involves an open and honest communication. The message should be unbiased and should focus on conveying respect to the recipient. Considering the nature of the receiver before communicating makes the process courteous, smooth and effective. Using empathy in communication enhances the relationship between the sender and the receiver. Courteous communication can also be effective when the cultural aspects of the receiver are also taken into consideration. Courteous communication strengthens the relationship among people. The next C is coherent. Communication should be meaningful, relevant and connected to the purpose of initiating the process. It should be simple and logical so that it can be perceived by the receiver in an effortless manner. Creating a message in a coherent way involves organizing the parts of the message in a logical and sequential order which enables the message to unfold in a meaningful way that can be received well by the receiver. Framing a coherent message also involves connecting the relevant parts of the information together so that a pattern or theme of an idea is communicated clearly. Incoherent messages create confusion and lead to forming incorrect inferences. Now we will understand the three major forms of communication we will focus on are verbal, non-verbal and written communication. Let us now discuss some of the ways in which verbal communication can be effective. It is always a good practice to use both the verbal with the non-verbal communication in transmitting a message to the receiver. A message usually tends to get strengthened when both the forms are used together. For example, a salesman uses his verbal communication skills to persuade the customer and uses his non-verbals like eye contact and body language to keep them engaged in the discussion. Any conversation of this sort gets registered in the minds of the receiver successfully for a long time. The next one is opening part of the message always attracts the attention of the listener. Therefore, it is important to keep it impressive and catchy. There is a common saying which goes like, "The first impression is the best impression." It is indeed true in certain situations. Therefore, the opening part of the message should elicit or demand attention from the receiver so that the message can reduce several other barriers that can be as a result of lack of attention from the receiver. The next one is asking questions in a two-way communication helps in clarifying the message. One can choose to ask open-ended questions or close-ended questions. Open-ended questions are helpful in eliciting longer responses, demands elaboration and discussion from the receivers, and they usually begin with why, what, how. For example, how was your experience? What made you upset that day? Close-ended questions are helpful in getting to the point. Short answers demands specific one or two words or one phrase responses, and they usually begin with do, did, when, would, will, who, where, has or have, etc. They are also questions for which answers are yes or no. For example, did you have your breakfast? Where were you yesterday? One should carefully choose which type of question needs to be posed based on the purpose and context of communication to ensure that there is a smooth flow. In verbal communication, it is always recommended to clarify the message, reflect and communicate the understanding back to the receiver to clear the air for misperception. One can use phrases like, did I hear you right? Is this what you mean? I understood that. Correct me if I am wrong in getting your message, and so on. Finally, closing the communication is as important as opening because the contact between the sender and receiver ends, hence it should be done effectively. Closing the communication includes summarizing and terminating the process of communication. It is always a good practice to summarize the whole message before the process of communication is terminated. A summary is usually done to tie the important elements together so that the message is re-emphasized, and the art of summarizing is extremely important as it requires one to make that last impression before ending the communication. Next, we will now move on to understand non-verbal communication. What are the ways in which we can improve non-verbal communication? Non-verbal communication is the communication through the body language, gestures, facial expressions and voice characteristics. It involves the part of communication that is not expressed through words. Peter F. Drucker has said that the most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said, and this is possible only if one attends to the non-verbals of the receiver. Most researchers suggest that non-verbal communication contributes to more than 80% of our day-to-day communication. This clearly states that there is a substantial need to understand this form of communication. We will now understand how we can improve non-verbal communication. The first one is eye contact. Eye contact plays a key role in non-verbal communication. Maintaining moderate level of eye contact is essential in establishing connection with the receiver. In different cultures, there are different levels of eye contact that is preferred. Therefore, developing cultural awareness and sensitivity is extremely vital with respect to eye contact and any other form of communication as well. The next one is being aware of one's facial expressions during the communication, and this can be of great aid in communicating the message effectively to the receiver. There are times when people pretend to be something that they don't believe in, and they can do a good job at the verbal communication. However, the non-verbals give away the latent message about the real intention. Therefore, managing one's facial expressions become challenging in certain times. Understanding others' facial expressions also requires expertise. However, it is always a good practice to confirm one's interpretation of facial expression through a verbal dialogue to enhance the communication between the sender and the receiver. The next one is giving adequate personal space while communicating is also one of the golden rules in communication. Personal space usually depends on the nature of the relationship that exists between the sender and the receiver. There are cultural differences with respect to personal space, and one needs to be mindful of that. Disrespecting personal space constraints affects the whole process of communication in a negative way. The next one is body posture. Body posture conveys the attitude and mood of the person. There are certain power postures which people engage in, and these power postures instill confidence in people before they engage in difficult situations. Examples of power postures are keeping hands on the hips while standing, raising one's hands into the air while standing, keeping the hands on the back of the head while standing, and so on. A slouched and bent posture conveys a negative image of a person. Moreover, one can understand by looking at the other person's posture whether one is experiencing positive emotions or one is experiencing negative emotions. Therefore, one needs to cultivate healthy and positive body postures and practice them often to make their influence more prominent. The next one is being conscious of one's tone of voice is also very important in communication. Tone of voice can convey different interpretations of the message to the receiver when used in different ways. For example, the sentence "I enjoyed the party, thanks" can be said in different tones. It can be told in a happy tone, sad tone, sarcastic tone, and so on. Based on the message, whether it is formal or informal, also the tone of voice needs to change. Specifically, this plays a key role in telephonic communication where there is no face-to-face contact between the sender and the receiver. Voice, pitch, volume, rate of speech, clarity and fluency need to be modified according to the purpose of the communication, and the situational factors also play a key role. Now let us move on to understand ways to improve written communication. The first one is practicing writing under supervision is one of the best ways to improve written communication. One needs to persevere to improve written communication as it takes a lot of time and effort from the writer to draft a message that is clear, concise and accurate, keeping in mind the needs of the receiver. Feedback can be obtained through supervision, and that can be an excellent way to improve one's style. Cultivating reading habit is also very important to improve one's written communication. The more one reads, the more one expands knowledge and seeks new ideas to communicate better. The next one is proofreading the message before finalizing proves helpful in reducing the errors in communication, and also it acts like a self-feedback. The next one, reading out loud while drafting the message helps us to be more mindful of the whole process and increases the efficiency in constructing the message. The next one is using simple language and avoiding jargons or technical words can help in transmitting the message accurately. Another good practice is writing the message once and rewriting the message few times proves beneficial in highlighting the important points of the message and helps to keep it short. Some of the other ways of enhancing communication are culture. Culture plays an extremely important role in communicating with another person from different cultural background, and one should aim at minimizing the cultural barriers to convey the information effectively. The next one is taking regular feedbacks. Feedback helps in creating the message in a comprehensible manner and aids in encompassing several perspectives. Active listening and empathy are two golden principles to enhance communication and build strong interpersonal relationships. Active listening conveys a message to the receiver that the sender is interested in the message that is being conveyed. Active listening can be developed by people by being completely in the present, engaged with the receiver in an open, non-judgmental and attentive manner. Empathy is the ability to take another person's perspective while listening to the message, processing the message and while responding to the message. This goal of empathy is to make the receiver feel understood and accepted in the process of communication. Empathy can also be developed by people by being aware and sensitive to one's own thoughts, feelings and emotions, behaviors, as well as others' thoughts, feelings, emotions and behaviors. Physical barriers can be avoided by taking precaution with respect to the physical conditions or the external environment during the process of communication. One should choose an appropriate place during the process of communication where there is less noise in the environment, less number of distractions present, in comfortable weather conditions, in good hygienic conditions, in good lighting conditions, so that verbal and non-verbal messages of others can be observed, and in case of face-to-face communication, the sender is able to see the message getting drafted clearly in case of written communication as well. The next one is psychological barriers. Psychological barriers can be avoided by having an open, alert, unbiased attitude towards the process of communication. Moreover, developing self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and relational sensitivity and awareness really helps in minimizing the psychological barriers to communication. Clear and objective organizational policies minimize organizational barriers to communication. Organizational hierarchy should be simple and flexible to transmit messages across different levels in the organizations. Other barriers to communication should be consciously gauged and attempts should be made to minimize them accordingly as they may differ with different situations. In this module, we have understood ways to improve communication, the 7 C's to improve communication, and different other approaches we take in order to improve communication. And finally, we looked at how can we make it effective with respect to different forms of communication, that is the verbal communication, non-verbal communication and written communication.